I want to remind you that Jared has a Bible on the table in the foyer for Cain Simons. The plan is for us to go visit him this last Tuesday. Josh and I went down, so Jared wants to give Cain this Bible this Tuesday. So if you'd like to highlight one or more of your favorite Bible verses in it, make a little note. If it has some special significance to you, put your name beside it. I think it will be an encouragement to Cain. He was asking some questions that relate to that kind of theme. And so Jared came up with the idea to get him this Bible. Tonight is my annual lesson on one of the works of the flesh. You see, you don't remember this series because I only do it once a year. But once a year I do it on one of the works of the flesh. And tonight is actually two works of the flesh. Envy and jealousy. Let me portray some real-life scenarios. A woman wants to decorate her house, and her husband is not in agreement because she just keeps spending more and more money on decorations. Another woman is upset at a friend of hers who is able to entertain friends better than she can. She said, if I had the kind of money she had, I could entertain like I was Martha Stewart. Another individual gossips a lot about what's going on in the church to friends. Another example, a man has spent a lot of time with a friend of his, and when they've been going through bad times, they've always been able to commiserate with each other. But the second individual has now had a series of positive things happening in his life, which makes the first person jealous of his friend who's having good things that's not happening to him. To give you one more example, a woman has self-esteem issues and she's jealous about her husband's coworker. And she gets angry. And this jealousy makes her think things going on that's not going on. And she starts treating her husband as if he's doing things that he isn't, which of course causes the gap to grow even wider. And she doesn't intend for it to happen, but her suspicions are feeding themselves. These are just a handful of examples of people dealing with envy and jealousy. Envy and jealousy are siblings. They're closely related. In fact, later on in the lesson, I'll point out that the Hebrew word is translated both, envy and jealousy. Now, there might be some distinction, but there's considerable overlap. And a lot of times, anger and unthankfulness are mixed into the picture as well. Envy wants what somebody else has. It doesn't have to be objects, things like a boat. It could be relationships. It could be characteristics. It could be any number of things that we might be envious of somebody else for what they have. Jealousy is fearful that somebody else is getting what you think you deserve. And so jealousy sometimes it involves more than one person, more than two people. And we're jealous of what somebody thinks of somebody else. You see, there's three people involved now. Song of Solomon says that love is as strong as death. And love, from the standpoint of jealousy, can be dangerous, even destructive, because envy can develop into feelings of malice. I'll make reference to this account again later, but you're familiar with David after he killed Goliath. King Saul was suspicious, the text says, 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 9. King Saul was suspicious of David. He was envious. We'll see in verse 8 when we come back to it. Envy manifests itself in a number of different ways. It can cause resentment towards somebody else and what they have that we want. It can cause anger towards them. It can cause us to lash out at them verbally, sometimes not even realizing what we're doing or the motivation behind it. And so tonight I'm going to challenge us to examine our hearts. I don't think every Christian necessarily is guilty of envy or jealousy, but it sure probably hits a lot of us. Envy is evident when we express dislike. It often is evident when we express dislike towards others. Envy is linked with pride. The idea that I deserve what you're getting. It's linked with greed. So one of the cures for envy and jealousy, of course, is going to be thankfulness towards God. Greed is the opposite of that, wanting more and not being thankful. So envy ultimately is rebellion against what God has given us. Envy is rebellion against the blessings that God has given to me and not wanting to accept the blessings that God has given to me. The Bible teaches that God is jealous, so jealous can be a good thing in the right context. In fact, God will say in Exodus chapter 34 and verse 16 that His name is jealous. So in the same way we can say God is love, 1 John 4 and verse 8, we can also say God is jealous, Exodus 34 and verse 16. So God's very nature is jealous towards human beings because He created us and He designed us in His image to live with us, to live with Him in heaven. And that's why God is jealous for us. Paul warns us not to provoke the Lord to jealousy. So what are some causes? What's the background for envy, feelings of envy and jealousy? As I've already indicated, dissatisfaction with what God has given us is one of the causes. I am not content with what God has given me. I'm not thankful to God for what He has given me. And so I envy what somebody else has. I don't think God's blessings on me are enough. I want more. Another cause of envy is comparing ourselves with others. Rather than seeing what God has given to me, I see what God has given you. And I compare myself with you. Generally, the way it works out is I compare my weaknesses to your strengths. And that's why I become envy. Certainly, one of the causes of envy and jealousy is pride. Because I think I deserve certain things. In fact, I may deserve more than what you're getting. That's pride. The idea that we think we merit anything from God. I think about that oftentimes when I read Facebook posts, and I've said it, and sometimes I catch myself. You deserve that. Do we? Do we deserve anything without giving the glory and honor to God? Another cause for envy and jealousy is a low self-esteem. where we see ourselves as insignificant rather than significant enough for Christ to die for us. Galatians 2 and verse 20, Christ died for me. The value of worldly gain is also another cause for envy and jealousy. Rather than thinking about the spiritual blessings that we have, we look at the material blessings that others have. And because we live in this physical world, then we value physical things. And so since I don't have the things that you have, then I get jealous. That's valuing worldly gain rather than what is important spiritually. And so these feelings of envy and jealousy that we have comes out. Sometimes, we don't even realize that the core of these negative feelings we have towards someone else is envy or jealousy, but we resent somebody else's blessings. We resent somebody else getting promoted or getting a raise or getting this or getting that. We resent that, and that causes us to compete with them. I've got to show my boss that I really am more important than that person. And so the idea of competition can come into play. Depression, because I'm not who I think I should be, which is what you're experiencing. A lack of contentment, again, not being thankful to God for what we have. And sometimes when we see what somebody else has and we resent what somebody else has, then we start criticizing them. And so we start gossiping. I don't have the mental ability to build myself up, and so I have to tear you down. That's envy and jealousy sometimes. Idolizing other people can also be a result of envy and jealousy. Putting people on a pedestal where they don't belong because we envy and we're jealous of what they have, who they are, the respect that they gain from other people around them, whatever it might be. And dissatisfaction with life. I'm not happy with where I am because I'm comparing myself with where you are, and so I just don't like life. I'm not satisfied with life. Like a lot of other sins, resentment, or rather envy and jealousy goes through stages. James 1:13 through 15, James says that sin begins as desires and develops into sin and ends in death. Envy begins with this initial stage where we compare ourselves with each other, or we see what each other has, and then we start scorning the other person, disdaining them, disvaluing them, because we don't like the fact that they're being blessed in a way that we're not. And we allow that dislike to fester in our hearts and develop into malice towards them, where we're actually doing things to hurt them, verbally especially, saying things that's not good and productive and helpful, certainly not loving, as we've studied monthly. Sometimes envy and jealousy will cause us to want to dominate a relationship. I've got to control this relationship because I'm jealous of what's going on, and I don't want you to receive blessings from somebody else, and so I'm going to control this relationship and make sure you don't receive more than what I think you ought to receive. You see how that envy works out in our thinking, our behavior. And so we become consumed with this idea that we have to be better than others. There are 16 questions we might ask ourselves to see if we're suffering from this work of the flesh of envy or jealousy. They may not apply to you. What's the situation that has prompted this difficult feeling that I have towards somebody else? Do I get upset when they receive some kind of advantage that I don't receive? Do I find it difficult to rejoice with those who rejoice, in the words of Paul in Romans 12? Do I sometimes feel like God is disappointed in me because He's not blessing me the way He's blessing you? Do you find yourself asking, if only I had ... Where do I find that most of my money goes? Is it going to put on a pretense for those people around me? Do I feel that I am being passed over for the things that I've accomplished? Do I sometimes feel like I'm trying to sabotage somebody else's blessings? Do I struggle with feelings of judging others? Do I find that I oftentimes have to be the best at something? Do any of these questions strike home to you? This is the last set of questions. Do I struggle with depression? Would I identify more with the best and the brightest rather with those on the fringe group? In other words, I want to be associated with those who are well respected. We oftentimes think of somebody in middle school or high school who wants to be in the in crowd. Is that where my heart is? Wanting to be in the in crowd. Do I find that I tend to put others on a pedestal? What about my marriage? What about my spouse's friendships with others? Has my spouse ever given me a reason to question our relationship? I think those are all real life questions that we might ask ourselves when we have the feelings in our heart that we know aren't right, and we're trying to work through those. So here's some counsel from the Word of God. The Hebrew word for envy or jealous is used 34 times in the Old Testament. Again, the same Hebrew word is translated either way. The first time it's used is in Genesis chapter 26, when the Philistines were envious of Isaac's prosperity. And that's when they closed up his wells. Maybe you remember that account. The Greek word for envy is only used 9 times. The first time it's found in the New Testament is Matthew 27, when Pilate acknowledged that the Jews were betraying Jesus out of envy. Paul, of course, will put envy amongst the works of the flesh. It's listed several times among the works of sin in the New Testament. And that's why it's so important for us to guard our hearts against feelings of envy and jealousy. And so the Apostle Peter will say in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 1 that we need to put off envy. And Peter, in fact, associates envy in that verse with evil speaking. Because a lot of times talking bad about other people is a result of feelings of envy and jealousy. The Greek word for jealous is used 11 times in the New Testament. The first time, Acts chapter 7, where Stephen refers to the brothers of Joseph who sold him into slavery, motivated out of jealousy. The word translated to be jealous can have a positive aspect as well. It can denote zeal. And so about half of the times I found, half of the times it's used in a positive way, to be zealous for what is good. Half of the time it's used in a negative way, to be jealous, in which case it is sinful. The core to overcoming feelings of envy and jealousy are these 3. Number 1, understand God's love. God loves you as much as He does me. God loves Christians in a unique and special way, above and beyond non-Christians. But He loves Christians equally. Number 2, we need to be content with who God made us to be. Now, if we have the ability to improve ourselves, then we have the ability to improve ourselves, and that ability comes from God. And let's take the opportunity to improve ourselves. But let's be content with how God has made us. And God didn't make me to be you. He made you to be you. And He made me to be me. And number 3, we need to love each other. For God, the way God has made each other. and respect that and appreciate that. So I want to draw this study to a close by giving you a number of steps to take to overcome feelings of envy and jealousy. Number one, be honest. We as human beings have an uncanny way of rationalizing our own behavior. We need to be honest with ourselves. And we need to ask God to help us with these negative feelings that we have. And we need to confess those feelings to God. And we need to focus on Jesus Christ. We need to focus on who He is. We need to focus on His teachings. We need to focus on His love for His followers. Number three, we need to develop a lifestyle of gratitude and worship. I've said on a number of occasions that the primary motivation for worship is thanksgiving. If we want to be more thankful, then we need to be more worshipful. We need to worship God more in order to develop the feelings of thanksgiving in our hearts. Read the Bible more. Pray through the book of Psalms. Pray through the book of Psalms. And thank God constantly for His love and His care for you as an individual. Number four, avoid activities that motivate you to compare yourself to others. Turn off the TV. Not just this season. All of those commercials on TV, it's just to make businesses money. They don't care one whit about you. I think we'd all be better off if we watched less TV. Now, that's not a Bible thing, as Cody said this morning. That's just Paul speaking. Paul, chapter 4, verse 3. He quoted Cody, chapter 4, verse 3 this morning. I'm simply saying, if you have a problem with feelings of envy or jealousy, quit putting images in your mind that makes you want to compare yourself to other people and what they have, and spend more time with God. Interrupt feelings of envy. Pray for God's blessings for you in the way God knows is right for you. Remind yourselves of the teaching of Jesus, Luke chapter 12 and verse 15, that life does not consist in the abundance of one's possessions. Life is not about stuff. It's about relationships, beginning with the relationship with Christ. Remind yourself that God has chosen you just like He's chosen me. 2 Thessalonians 2 and verse 13. If there are qualities in somebody else that you find yourself envying, thank God that that person has those qualities, and ask God to help you develop those qualities. And that will turn the feelings of envy into feelings of admiration. And that would be a good thing. Interrupting feelings of jealousy, again, be honest with yourself, spend time with God, transform your mind. We had a lesson on this earlier this year. Love does not envy. Do something right then to show your love. Make a phone call, send a card. Get yourself out of yourself. And number 7, this is the last point, grow. Grow and mature. Life is one long classroom in which God is trying to form us into the image of His Son. And so when we see where we've got areas to grow, let's work on growing. We should evaluate our own talents, our own gifts, recognizing that God has given those to us. We need to practice the spiritual disciplines. I'm talking about prayer and Bible study and meditation and singing and encouraging others, serving others. Then we can grow and we can mature. And we can be more like Christ. Just a few Bible verses, and we'll be finished. God recognizes that there is the possibilities, particularly in a man's heart, to be jealous for his wife. So in Numbers chapter 5, God actually gives the Jews a procedure to go through if a Jewish man was jealous of his wife and believed that she had been unfaithful to him. It's called the law of jealousy, in fact. And the reason why I bring that up is to illustrate that God recognizes that it can grow in our hearts, and God provided them with a process to go through in order to alleviate those feelings of jealousy. And so when we have those feelings, we need to work through them in the eyes of God in order to be right with Him. 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 8 again is dealing with King Saul and David. King Saul complained that after David killed Goliath, the nation of Israel started singing, Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his tens of thousands. And rather than being thankful to God that He had put a man in King Saul's life who had such success on the battlefield, King Saul was jealous. And as far as the biblical record is concerned, King Saul spent the rest of his life trying to hunt down David and kill him. Now, we don't know what time frame that is from chapter 17, which is where David kills Goliath, until chapter 31 when King Saul is killed by the Philistines. We don't know the time frame exactly there. King Saul reigned for 40 years. But as far as the record is concerned, King Saul pretty much wasted the rest of his reign because he couldn't get his brain off of off of David. That just illustrates how destructive envy and jealousy can be. 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 2 is using jealousy in a positive way. The Apostle Paul spoke to the church at Corinth, and he says, I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. And that should be our concern. It's the concern of the elders here. It should be the concern of all faithful Christians, that we're jealous of each other and your relationship with God, because that is what's most important. So we have to be careful that we don't allow ungodly jealousy to harm ourselves and to harm others. And so once again, in the words of the Apostle Peter in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 1, we might need to throw off envy with its evil speaking so that we can be faithful to Christ. Let's be grateful for how God has designed us. Let's be grateful for the fact that God has made it possible for us to be holy in His eyes. But to do that, we've got to follow His Word. And in the words of the Hebrew writer in chapter 12, we may have to lay off this sin that is weighing us down because we compare ourselves with others. And we don't need to do that. It's either unfair to them or it's unfair to us, probably unfair to both. So let's stop comparing ourselves to others. Our looks, our possessions, our jobs, our abilities, qualities, characteristics that we have. Let's be thankful to God. Focus on the blessings He has given to us as His children. And put our energies into serving Him rather than being envious of others. So the invitation is extended to you tonight. If you need our prayers or our encouragement for you to live and walk in the Spirit of Christ, let the church family know while we stand and sing together.